Heap of Stones, A Heap of Stones, refers to the name of a village in England, which is where I made most of the recordings. The village is called Shap. It's in the north of England, and it comes from a Scandinavian name which means a heap of stones, because there were always a lot of stones there, and that's stones from, there are quarries, so people are cutting stone out of the mountains, basically, to build with and to turn into cement and to do all sorts of things. But it also goes back to the prehistoric times. So in the area there were also quarries for making stone axes. And Shap was known in the, I guess, up until about the 17th, 18th century maybe, as the place where there was this avenue of menhirs, of these standing stones that went all the way through the village. And so it must have been like a huge kind of monument, you know, not like Stonehenge is round, and this was like Stonehenge but long. And you can still, if you walk through the village now, you still see some parts of these stones in the walls, because they were pink. They were special pink granite stones that were used for this avenue. And at some point they just chopped them up and turned them into gate posts or bits of wall or bits of houses and things like this. So it would never happen now, of course. It would be like a protected site. But yeah, so there's this, a heap of stones refers to the place, and the fact also that this kind of, I don't know what, if you would call it exploitation of stone, or the use of stone is still going on, and it's part of everyday life, because a lot of people work there with stone. And so that's kind of the inspiration for the title. And really in this, I mean, this is, it's a project that I'm going to be working on probably at least a year or maybe longer, I don't know. And I've started basically just with these sound recordings. So it's recording sounds of stones, recording sounds of the factories and the quarries, recording the sounds of nature. Yeah, making a composition with them. There are one big valley there, Haweswater, there was a lake there. But then they decided they needed this to make this reservoir, so they flooded the whole, got rid of the village basically. All the villages had to move. They had to move the graveyard. They have a special graveyard in Shap, which they moved from Mardale, which was this old village. They flooded it, and now there's this pipeline which takes water to Manchester. And some of the recordings I've made are of these kind of, I guess they're sort of inspection stations and pump stations along the way which convey this water. So you hear these sometimes very resonant recordings because I've put very small microphones in, like pushed them through holes in these in these inspection places. So you also hear the kind of resonance of the space, which in this case fits very well with the resonance of the exhibition space, I think. And I was experimenting with different ways of recording. So some of the streams there I've recorded by walking along the stream and making a recording, and then I play back the recording in one ear while listening to another microphone in the other ear, and then I try to walk at exactly the same speed along the river, and then I do it multiple times, so I build up these layers of sound. So there are some parts in the exhibition where we hear the same river more or less in the same place simultaneously through all of the 8 speakers, but it keeps changing and moving because I'm not quite moving in the same way each time. So that's something that I like to play with, is experimenting with different ways of using microphones to create a different spatial impression in the installation. In this very special building, that was very inspiring to think about, okay, I've got these recordings from a long way away. They're also it's also a rural place, but it's a very different kind of place. But some of the sounds are kind of similar. The sounds of animals, birds, the wind in the trees, this kind of things are not so different. But for me, I think the interesting thing was to turn it into something that would work with the space, because it's a very special space in terms of its shape and the light and the sound of it as well. So this week, we've been working on slightly changing things, trying different things with the loudspeakers and moving them around. And I like when there's a point where it becomes, where you work on something and it becomes something else. So instead of being just a sort of documentary recording of what's going on, it becomes a kind of a sculpture or something, that it works with the space. Maybe because at the moment you don't really, apart from people work, the sounds of work, people working, you don't really hear any people in it. There are no voices. So this is something that I want to do, is make interviews with people who live and work there. And there's quite a few different angles which are interesting. I mean, in terms of the ecology, particularly. So one thing is that some of the quarries have been shut down and they're being rewilded. So they're kind of leaving them somehow to nature in the hope that something will change, or just leaving them alone to see what will happen. So there are also scientists involved with that, so it'll be interesting to talk to people like that. And every quarry also has a geologist who works there, for instance, who knows about, how the stone, that's going, back much further than human history into geological time, knowing about how the land was formed. And I think that's kind of interesting to look at these different timescales. And now what's happening, which I have only just heard about, but is quite interesting, is that because of, and then you get into politics as well, because of Brexit, when the UK left the European Union, they had a time to kind of, the sort of period of whatever you call it, when they were sort of going from one sort of regime of laws, environmental laws, into another one. They wrote a new basically environmental program for farmers, or it's actually replacing the subsidy system for farmers, which was always very generous from the EU, and it was based on how much land you had. So if you had a big farm, you got loads of money, right? To put it in a very blunt way. Now there are all these things built into the new UK guidelines, which are about leaving land aside for ecological reasons, so not farming on certain things. So on paper, it seems to be a great very green kind of policy, which will encourage farmers to kind of leave some of the land unused, or to encourage wildlife to live there. But there's a very negative result of that happening at the moment, which is that some big most farmers in the north of England, they don't own the land, they rent it. And it turns out that for some landowners, they make more money now by kicking the farmers off the land and then turning it into a wood or something, or and now this is now starting really to affect farmers in this area. So it'll be really interesting to see if that really plays out around the village. I know there have been demonstrations in the local town, but I'd like to talk to people about this, because I know there are some places there where some farms which are working in a very ecological way and trying to deal with very valleys which have very, very special kind of wildlife, and they're trying to do it in a very ecological way. And then you just have people who have sheep, and they've always had sheep, and for generations they've been on this land and if they don't own their land, then they're in big trouble now, maybe.